Hey everybody out there, you're tuned in to 91.8 The Fan. You're in my corner and I have a very special guest in the corner. Would you like to unveil your secret identity to the masses?
Hey there, masses. I'm American McGee, and I'm the founder of Spicy Horse Games in Shanghai.
And it's very nice to have you on today. I know you have a very lovable cult following to some of your mini games. So I know that the IRC chat is probably going crazy and very excited to see you on the show today.
I'm very happy to be here and always enjoy making people go crazy.
I would too walk into the room with a big t-shirt that says American McGee. Yeah! All the gamers shout, raise their drinks. But today we're here to talk about Alice Otherlands, which is a Kickstarter that you recently started. I believe it only has a few more days left to go. Could you explain a little bit about the premises of the Kickstarter?
Sure, we've got, I think it's like 15 days left at this point, and the idea is that this game I created some like 12 years ago based on Alice in Wonderland has been followed up with a sequel about 2 years ago called Alice Madness Returns, and this is the sequel to that. This would be the third part of a trilogy, and the idea is we're seeing the character Alice go into the minds of other people, hence the name Otherlands, and explore around. And we're doing that via a collection of animations that we're going to provide to the backers of the campaign, and going out to a number of different directors, writers, and animators to get animations that each one of them explores a different mind. Like, say, one of them is the mind of Thomas Edison, one of them might be the mind of Jules Verne, and each of those rendered in a different style by a different director. So probably the closest thing that the world has seen to something like this would have been the Animatrix project that followed up the release of the Matrix films, where they did a similar sort of different styles and different little vignettes from the world and the universe of the Matrix.
Now, one of the interesting things about this project is I believe the company that owns the rights actually went to you and offered them to you.
Yeah, that's the thing that kind of goes beyond just the animations, is that we're trying to acquire the rights to the film aspects of the Alice property. So it's an unusual situation where EA, which is the company I worked for when I created the Alice property, they own obviously the game rights. But before we finished the first Alice, EA sold the film rights to these outside Hollywood producers. And so those guys have held on to those rights for the last 10 plus years, and they've also tried to get projects going, but haven't been successful. And they recently came to me and said that they're they're essentially looking to move on, and that they're going to sell these rights, but they wanted to give me the first opportunity to purchase them before they put them on the open market.
I mean, I gotta say, you don't really see that in the Hollywood world very often, so that's really neat.
Yeah, it's a very unusual situation, and one that I think is really great for us because it gives us a degree of control over this property that obviously has so many fans and so many people interested around the world. But to date, we've not really had any ability to satisfy their desire for more pieces of the property to come out, either as animations or toys or comic books or art books or anything like that. So we won't be able to make games with this, but we will be able to make everything else. We can make animation shorts, we can make feature films, we can make toys and posters and all kinds of other merchandise that go along with the films and the animations. So it also puts us in a position, I think, to prove to the world the value and the level of interest in the Alice property, which I think would translate in the future into there being additional games.
Well, I think the interesting thing about Alice is that it lends itself to being a big feature film, which I know this isn't exactly that, but do you have your eyes set on that for possibly the future?
Oh, absolutely. So one of the announcements that we made yesterday was about a director who's here in China. He's very famous for doing kung fu, Hong Kong kung fu action movies. And there's a degree of visual style and also violence in his films that matches very well with the type of presentation we've seen in the Alice games to date. So his name is Sui Hark, and he's a very well-known producer, writer, and director. And so he's attached himself to the project just yesterday and basically told the world that anything he can do to help us get a film made, he's going to do. And that may include him coming on board to write or direct or produce this film. And one of the things we're exploring is getting that done here in China or in Hong Kong, because there's a massive film industry here with a tremendous amount of talent and ability to build world-class films. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at now.
That'll be definitely interesting for the fans to see. I'm really excited myself because I know that the Alice games are supposed to be a trilogy, and this is kind of a sneak peek into that would-be last game.
Yeah, it's kind of fun that we can go into the minds of all these different characters without having to worry about the rules related to the game. So if it were a game, there'd need to be a lot of setup as to how she approaches, say, Mark Twain, for instance, is one of the characters. We might go into his brain. So be like, how's she going to get to Twain's brain? In the game, you'd have to present all of that. But with these animations, we may only have 5 minutes in which to show the interior of this brain and this imagination. So we'll just go straight into it. And that means we can do things that come off either like kind of long format music videos where it's just a visual exploration of someone's subconscious, or we may do things where there's more of a narrative arc and we actually see a beginning, middle, and end to a small journey that looks kind of like a dream or a nightmare inside that person's subconscious.
What's nice about hearing that too is that it won't necessarily spoil the eventual third game that the fans are pandering for.
Yeah, we can do some stuff in the animations where we're going into brains that may not be useful inside of the game, right? The idea for the game is that Alice is fighting a larger evil in the world, one that affects not just her or the people that she cares about in nearby and her family and friends, but also affects the society at large. And so, in choosing the characters that she's going to invade in that game, we're going to have to be more selective in making sure that those characters really have something to do with the goal that she's trying to achieve of defeating this evil. Whereas with these animations, we're in a much more free-form kind of position to just explore all kinds of brains simply because they're interesting and without there having to be a larger goal or accomplishment at the end.
I feel that's really nice to picture for the game too, because with the previous incarnations of Alice, there was kind of a build-up. Like, for example, Alice Madness Returns, there was that climax at the end where she was kind of empowered by hurting someone. Spoils.
Right.
So, it's nice to see that she has somewhere to go with that. She hasn't necessarily reached a peak of power.
Well, that's the idea here is that throughout this trilogy, she's been growing in power. She's been coming closer to really achieving her full potential. And that's a pretty traditional story arc if you look at like the Joseph Campbell dissection of the hero's journey that you see in films like Star Wars or The Matrix. That same arc plays out where early on, if you take Neo in The Matrix, for instance, his initial struggle is with his own trying to grasp with the fact that he's got these powers and he's simply trying to free himself as an individual. And then by the time he gets to the second part of the arc, he's trying to save those that are near to him. So he's got a love interest in the form of Trinity. And so that becomes the issue of the second film is to, how to save his friends and sort of his adopted family. But by the third film, and you see that he's trying to save the society as a whole. And he's also kind of gone through this similar arc that Alice is going through of first overcoming the psychological problems or obstacles, and then the second part of the journey, overcoming the external physical parts of the problem. And then in the third part, he's combining those things together so that he can use his power in the Matrix also in the real world. And so you also see that same kind of thing happening, say, for instance, in the Star Wars trilogy. And that's the same type of journey that Alice is taking.
Now, I will say one of the neat things though was just to travel with her on the journey so far. To see like these animations that'll be produced will be a lot of fun. And I think the fans have voiced approval with this too, that they just want to experience more that is Alice in her world.
Yeah, so far it's been great that there's not a sort of questioning of the logic of what it is we're trying to do. I mean, I've actually been a little surprised because I think I expected a little more resistance at this idea that, hey, we're going to have Alice exploring the wonderlands of other people's minds. but people seem to have taken to it very naturally. There seems to be very little resistance to the idea that she could do this, and so that to me is satisfying to know that we don't kind of have to fight against something that people feel is unnatural.
Well, it was set up really well too. From my personal experience playing Madness Returns, I just liked her overall growth and how at the end I was left with questions like what happens next? And that's what made the game stay with me is because I didn't know all the answers.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good rule is that if you answer all the questions, people then don't have anything to talk about once they're done playing it by themselves. And I've noticed this that if I go to my forums or my Facebook, the fans have got a billion questions, and I'll tell them like, look, it's just not fun if I fill in all the blanks for you. It's much better for you guys as a community if things meant and why this thing happened. And so that's actually something that I'll build into the games when we're putting them together is a lot of space where there can be multiple different interpretations. But what that means is I kind of have to come at it from 8 or 9 different directions so that there's enough sense of the possibilities that you could say, well, how did that work or why exactly did that happen? So it's sort of like designing 8 stories inside of one.
Well, that helps build up the world too. Like I was talking with Colin earlier about this and how, Alice is a world you can get lost in because there's so many elements of like whimsy and kind of, dark and morbid. It's not hyper realistic. It's not like Call of Duty Brown. It has
Yeah.
it has sections to it that make you go, "Oh my God, that's really cool," and you'll stop and you'll stare and you'll see if you can connect it back to the plot or if it's just there in the world.
That's one of the things I've always felt is kind of a shame with the types of materials that you see being created with the technology we have for games. So, like you mentioned, Call of Duty or the Grand Theft Auto series. The problem I have with those, and I think they're great games and they're fun, but when the whole industry becomes about using this technology to recreate the reality of the world we already live in, it feels to me like we're sort of doing a disservice to ourselves because we're not really expanding the possibilities and using our imaginations to create fantastic worlds, which ultimately to me seems to be the most satisfying thing that we could do with this kind of technology is to go other places, right? But instead it seems like so much of the industry focuses on recreating reality, and to me after a while that kind of gets boring because I can step outside if I want reality.
No, I totally agree. In fact, excuse me, I'm going to mention another game here, but I'm super excited for this game coming out on PlayStation 3 called Puppeteer because it's fantasy-like and it's a stage play and it's pretty unique from some of the other stuff I'm seeing this holiday season. And all my
Yeah.
friends are like, "That looks boring. I don't like that." And I'm like, "It's unique. It's different."
Yeah, that's what always surprises me. I read comments and people will say, "Why does this guy want to reinvent Alice or Oz? Hasn't there been enough of this?" And these are the same exact people who've now played, how many 5, 6, whatever Call of Duties in a row. And so, for whatever reason, when you repeat something in that genre of the Grand Theft Auto or whatever, the cries about unoriginality or about it being boring are not there. But then the moment that you try to present something that's truly creative and goes out on a limb, there's very little support for it. And so I think I mean that's part of the problem is that the industry doesn't support creative exploration in technology and themes like that.
We're going to take a short break here on 91.8 The Fan, but don't go anywhere because our special guest isn't going anywhere, and we'll continue our discussion about Kickstarter and various other indie things. So keep it tuned to 91.8 The Fan, where we play everything you want and nothing you don't. And we're back here on 91.8 The Fan. I've got my special guest, American McGee, here on the show, which is a wonderful honor, so let's get back to it. I mean, obviously, Kickstarter the past year and a half to 2 years has been a good outlet for consumers to, support the industry and things like that. But at the same time, I think they're getting a little bit scared. And I don't mean to put blame on anybody, but it seems that Double Fine running out of money several times now has made people double think about what they back and what they support.
Well, I wrote up a piece defending what had happened with them, and I made the point that if you're a gamer, you can't bash the big evil publishers for being big and evil, and then turn around and slam the small independent studio when they reveal to you the truth about their position and the difficulties in getting something made. And a lot of people are saying, well, they initially asked for a certain amount of money, they got a lot more than that, and so why on earth would they have problems? But the reality is that, of course, they expanded the design, and their ambitions sort of got the better of them. But ultimately, they're not asking for. I mean, that keeps coming up. They're not asking for more money. They're just talking about changing the way in which they're going to go about the release, and they're putting their own money into supporting that idea. So I kind of felt like the games media did a massive disservice in jumping on this as if it was a massive scandal, when in fact, what it should have been viewed as was a huge win for transparency and for the connection between the audience that backed this project and the developer that's trying to deliver this to them. The reality that I saw was the backers were not upset. Very, very few, small, tiny percentage of them were really upset about this announcement because they read it and they understood it and they were fine with it. It was everyone else. That
Yeah,
was
the
the
people
media,
who didn't back it.
yeah, who didn't back it. They were the ones that were freaking out and getting upset. And it's like, for what? You weren't harmed in any shape, form, or way. And the people who backed it were not crying foul or scam. And yet the media and the people commenting on these articles were coming out and trying to suggest that this was the end of Kickstarter. And to me, again, this is sort of those things where, as an industry and as a consumer, we have choice. We have choice about the types of games we play. People complain about seeing sequels year after year after year, except they keep buying them. And then, an opportunity for a platform like Kickstarter comes along that could reshape how we fund interesting and innovative ideas, and they call it a scam, and they run away from it, or they chase it with pitchforks the moment they perceive that something's gone wrong.
I mean, I'm a backer of that project myself, and I really enjoyed the documentary. And the outlash of it was what really surprised me. Like, even someone that we both backed the project, we sit down and we watch the documentary together. I was telling him what was going on, and he seemed shocked at first until he was able to finish the episode and get the whole story, because of the way people were saying everything was happening. I mean, you saw headlines, they don't have enough money, or
So
they.
that's the issue of groupthink, and it's something where you've got the media, the writers, say on Kotaku, or You're a Gamer, or one of these websites, viewed by the people reading the article as an authority figure. And if that authority figure gives them the first idea that something is wrong, or that they should question what's going on and that it's a negative situation, for the vast majority of people, that's all it takes. They're not going to read further. They're gonna go along with what the group is saying. So then, if they scroll down to the comments and they see that 99% of the people in the comments are angry and are trying to make noise about what a scam this is or how bad this is, they stop thinking for themselves, and they simply allow the group to decide for them that this is bad.
Now, ironically, this was close to the premises of the Oz Project, wasn't it?
That is exactly the premise of Oz, and it was one of the reasons why I've always done research on topics like this, but especially for Oz, as I was going through and working on the story and design for that, what became very really interesting to me was the fact that Oz also suffered a similar fate because the title was Oz Zombie, and so I thought this was a cute play on words, and this was also a way for us to protect the IP, so we would own a name that was in a clear space. But what happened was people saw that name, and instead of reading a little further to understand we were talking about a societal or sort of a zombie in the sense of culture, they immediately jumped to the conclusion this was about brain-eating zombies, a la the Last of Us, or one of these recent zombie movies. And so there was this massive backlash. Oh my God, the world doesn't need another zombie game. And to me, it made me laugh, even though it was disappointing because it kind of screwed up our campaign, that they were proving the idea of the game in their reaction, that they were unable to think for themselves and to see beyond the headline. And so it sort of doomed the campaign to being misunderstood.
Yeah, I did have friends when I would link them to it would be like, a zombie game. We don't need another one of those. And to be honest, I didn't care because you and your studio were making it, and you guys make fantastic worlds. And if I can get lost in a game, I can be forgiving no matter what's in it. But I believe you had an update concerning that with an exact definition of what the quote unquote zombies were like in the game.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. I mean, by the time you do an update to try to explain it, it's too late. You really only get that one chance, that first impression. And so I think in a lot of ways, once we'd suffered the damage of being mistaken for your typical zombie game, that was it. It was game over.
Well, do you think you'll approach that project in a different way in the future?
My personal inclination is to leave it alone, to not come back to it, and to not try to revive it. But people here inside the company and also supporters of the campaign are demanding that we give it another shot. My personal view is that it's sort of like the market has spoken, right? We gave it a chance. It was up there. It had a fair amount of press. It had a chance, and yeah, it suffered bad timing. Like we did our campaign launch the same week that Double Fine announcement came out about their project, and there was the naming problem, and there was just a lot of other stuff going on, and so I think that the two camps, one side thinks we didn't have a fair shot, and personally, I think we had a fair shot, and we should just move along.
It's kind of a shame from a fan's perspective because I feel like in a way when you're Kickstarter hunting and you see a project that's interesting, if it's by a company or a person that you trust and you've enjoyed all of their other projects or at least the good majority of it, I feel like you should use that trust when you back a project. Like I didn't know the big details of the Oz project. In fact, most of it I learned from Colin, but I still backed it.
Sure. Well, I think what I don't know how much to believe what I read on the internet. Obviously, that's a dangerous thing, but there certainly seems to be a fair amount of people on the sites, the major news gaming sites, that are very resistant to the idea of stuff from the studio, and specifically around stuff from me. So I don't know. I think we've got more than your typical kind of resistance to try to fight against in order to get stuff made. I wouldn't dare to put us in the same category as a Double Fine, because I think they've had a really strong track record of very unique stuff. Whereas, for our studio, we've done a very broad and kind of weird range of things. Some console development, some episodic PC stuff, some mobile stuff. These days we've got some free-to-play stuff, that we're doing. And so that gives people a lot of opportunity to point and say, well, these guys aren't consistent. And, my answer would be like, yeah, we're not. We take a lot of risks. We do a lot of weird stuff. But the problem is that gets held against us. We don't get viewed as quirky and different because we try lots of different stuff. We just get slammed for trying lots of different stuff.
I don't know, that's really sad to me. But there's not a whole lot you can do to change that sort of thing. I mean, it's to see a company that takes a lot of risk and survive, especially in this day and age in terms of gaming, is really miraculous.
Yeah, but we don't get credit for that. I've read people making comments that suggest, our survival is in question, and that's why they shouldn't back us, because we're probably going to go out of business any day now, so let's not back these guys. The logic that I read a lot of times is really bizarre, and the fixation that people have, for instance, on a project that I did 10 years ago that they thought was bad, to me is really incredible. So I did a bad game by most accounts, 10 years ago called Bad Day LA. And yet when news about a zombie comes up or about a new Alice game comes up, half the comments sometimes will be people going, well, screw that guy. He made that Bad Day LA thing. And I'm like, well, yeah, I did, but that was like a decade ago. I mean, why, since then I've made some pretty decent stuff. Why are you still fixated on that? And it's strange because there are plenty of studios that, make an uneven, they release uneven product. But for whatever, and they don't get, kind of beat up for it. But for whatever reason, the fact that I made one bad game 10 years ago somehow still has bearing on whatever it is I might do tomorrow.
Well, I can't say that I'm not guilty of doing that with certain game studios because there's one game studio for 10, 15 years, the past like 7 to 10 games have just been upset. Like they've just been things that I've been, yeah, I'm so excited. Oh no. And it happened to me so many times that I
But
can kind of understand.
but the thing is, like when we've made something like an Alice game, the Alice games have been pretty consistent, right? And that's partly because the studio. It's also partly because the budget that went into making the games was a decent budget with a fair amount of time to make the product. But like when people talk about Bad Day LA, what they're not taking into context is that that budget for that game was super tiny, and it was a game that was launched at a sale price of 19.99 by a budget publisher. It was never meant to compete with or be judged on the same level as a $50 or $60 console title like the Atlas games. So that's the thing that always surprises me is that there's no allowance for exploration or for budget or for intention. If you set out to make a budget film on purpose, then people will go, well, this is a low budget film, an indie film, and they'll give it a kind of different viewing than they would say, the next big Lord of the Rings movie. So that's the thing that I kind of wish our industry would get a grasp on, is an understanding of what it is that the products are meaning to do in context of the things that have come before or after.
And it just shows how much the gaming industry, like from a consumer standpoint and also a media standpoint, needs to just mature. Because we praise indie games, for example, all the time, but we're not finding an in between between indie and AAA.
Well, so that's the thing. Like my games these days, they're all indie games. We are an indie studio. We're 100% self-owned, and we're not getting money from EA. The budgets on our games are relatively small, or even small. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I don't even pay myself. I'm not even the highest paid person in my own studio. Like, we run and live on a budget here, like really serious budget. And people still, though, say, well, that's the guy that's got his name on the box, therefore everything he does must be at some certain level. That's not true. I don't want to always make big games, and at the same time, I don't want to always be judged by the big game standard when I come out and do something smaller. So that's also been a big struggle for us, is how to get people to recognize sort of which category to put us in, depending on which product it is that we're putting in the market.
And hopefully that puts it in perspective for some of the listeners out there, and myself included, because, in terms of gaming industry, I know very little about it. I'm not involved in it. The only thing I can do is find the games that I enjoy and back projects that I think I will enjoy, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I do the same thing. That's one of the things I like about Kickstarter. I've backed big and small, and I tend to read into what the projects are about. But I do the same thing with the books I read and the films I watch and the music that I enjoy. I enjoy reading more about the people who made the things that I consume. And I think that that's important, that if you're going to support artists and you're going to find things that you love and you're going to make noise about those things in a positive way, you ought to really have a better understanding of where it's coming from creatively. And again, I think a lot of people, they just go to the top 10 list, they select what everyone else is selecting, and they thereby reinforce the constant reproduction of mass market stuff that all looks exactly the same, and yet they then turn around and complain that everything looks the same. So I think a little effort is required in order to kind of move us past that problem.
I know, I definitely understand what you're talking about. And in terms of games, for example, that I find myself playing, is I'm avoiding a lot of the stuff that's, really popular. Shooters, for example, like I don't even touch anymore. I think I'm playing an RPG called Alteria Rorona, and it's all about item synthesis, like synthesis. That's the entire game thus
Right.
far. And it's such a weird concept. And when I try and explain it to other people, they're like, I don't, like, is that all you do? Just, it's just that? Well, you can fight some monsters and get supplies and make more items. And everyone's like, well, that doesn't sound very fun. But I'm literally playing it, 5, 6 hours a day just because there's an overarching story and you can interact with different characters and be friends with them and things like this. And it's a really childish idea, but it's different than say, the people on staff who you're playing Battlefield are there.
Yeah, I think games need more sort of childish approach to them. I mean, look at Minecraft, right? If you had tried to take that concept to a pitch session at a major publisher, they would have laughed you out of the room because it's so simple. And yet that's exactly why we love it. It's obvious, it appeals on a number of different interesting levels, but as a pitch, it's an awful, awful pitch. You have to play it in order to understand it. And that's why I think platforms like Kickstarter are really important because they give independent developers who are interested in doing interesting new things a chance to bring those things to life.
Definitely. Now, for the listeners out there who want to, support other lands and see what else you guys are doing besides Kickstarter, where can they stay up to date?
Well, we've got a bunch of different sort of channels. Facebook is one where we have pages set up for myself and for other lands and our other projects. Spicy World is our gaming portal where we've got our 3 live games running, so people can go to spicyworld.spicyhorse.com, and by signing up there, they'll automatically start to receive newsletters if they want, or they can opt out of newsletters. And they can also check out the games that we have running live today. Plus, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram and Vine and all kinds of other places if you just search for my name.
Because it is a very unique name. I'm sure many people have talked about your name before. But, it's easy to remember and it's easy to find. So that's a thumbs up.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge sometimes because I have so many people that come up to me that I've clearly met in the past who, of course, they remember my name, but then I never remember theirs. And so I'm always left feeling like a jerk because, like, everybody, even if I met them one time 15 years ago, everybody remembers my name. And then I turn around and I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember meeting you, but I forgot your name. That puts me at a disadvantage all the time.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I think everyone who meets a lot of people just like one time 15 years ago, they will always have that experience. Everyone has it at least once. You probably have it 1,000 more times, but at least we can all share in your pain a little bit.
Yeah, I hope so.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell the listeners out there about the project or anything you want them to know about the gaming industry or your company?
I think we've covered it pretty well already. The main thing for us really these days is just this Kickstarter campaign. And, I hate to look like we're sort of panhandling on the internet, as Kotaku called it, but the reality is we really do need people's support to get hold of these film rights and to make sure that they don't end up being owned by some faceless corporation. And so, if we do have these rights, it'll give us an opportunity to build a lot of really interesting content into the future. So that's the big thing. Just head over to Kickstarter and check out Alice Otherlands.
Well, I know our fans are certainly interested, and I'm insanely interested just due to the snippets of art we've seen so far, and the art from the Alice series in the past has always been really just kind of strange and twisted and unique.
Yeah, thank you so much. Glad that you enjoy it. I think, yeah, it's got a lot of potential.
And now, one thing we have at the end of our interviews is a 91.8 The Fan tradition, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to participate.
You have to tell me what it is before I can agree.
I promise we don't ask you to say I hate EA or something else. We basically ask if you'd be willing to do a radio bump for us, which is you say your name, you say what you do, and you're tuned into 91.8 The Fan.
Sure, no problem. You want me to do that now?
Yes, if you would be willing.
Okay. Hey there, I'm American McGee, the founder of Spicy Horse Games in Shanghai, and you're tuned into 91.8 The Fan.
See, that wasn't so hard. And for anybody out there that missed any of this interview, shame on you, but don't fret, it'll be up on the website within the next few days, so keep it tuned to 91.8 The Fan. Everything you want and nothing you don't.